Hello everyone, I'm Nethma and I debated for St. Bridget's Convent and currently I am coaching HFC Bambalapitiya. Today I'll be discussing Olcott's quarters motion which reads, this house opposes the rise of sorority as a strategy to promote feminist ideals. Two main points of setup. First question then, what does a sorority look like? I think both sides can agree that a sorority is this unspoken moral obligation that exists within the feminist movement to support women in almost all instances. And any member who fails to uphold this obligation will probably be called out, shamed, or even excluded. And the reason that I assume it's going to be the feminist movement is because the only actor who would have an incentive to promote feminist ideals is the feminist movement, and the only individuals who would buy into this narrative are all probably feminists as well because of the previous reasoning. Second question then, what does using sorority as a strategy look like? It probably looks like narratives such as women supporting women, believe all women, etc., being prevalent in social media platforms, politics, and in feminist spaces. Two arguments for proposition. First argument, whether the most vulnerable women benefit from sorority strategy. What does a vulnerable woman look like? They probably have no financial independence and they live in a conservative environment where they're active victims of the patriarchy, but they probably face issues like SA or even abuse. Which brings me to my first layer, what's the likelihood of vulnerable women buying into these narratives? Most of the women in these communities are already in a bad position, which means that they simply don't have the ability or the privilege to help or support other women. Most of them are probably focusing on themselves, preserving themselves, and surviving through the day. For example, you're probably not going to help your female coworker that's getting harassed if you know that there's a risk of you getting fired because there's no strong checking mechanism like HR in your company because you live in a third world country. Why is this harmful? Because it pressurizes women who simply don't have the capacity to support other women, but also, secondly, you will be looked down upon if you don't prioritize others' utility over yours. Thirdly, I want to note that these narratives are created by elite women at the top who cannot relate to your problems, um, which means that there's going to be active disconnect in terms of the capacity of things that you can do. But fourthly, sororities can often be radical and extreme because um because it is this community where you are told to engage in specific acts and it's almost this cultish behavior. Therefore, what is expected of you as a woman can also be very extensive. Second layer then, what's the likelihood of vulnerable women relating to this movement? I think it's likely that the faces of this movement are going to be Western liberal elitist women due to two reasons. Because feminist hubs are mainly concentrated in Western countries, which means that they have more exposure and knowledge to these concepts. But secondly, because they have simply don't have any consequences for voicing out their opinions because it's accepted that women should talk about issues that they are facing, etc. This then means that liberal women are going to be talking about issues that are very proximate to them, not because they have any malicious intent, but because they want to solve the problems that they are going through on a daily basis, but also because they don't understand religious and cultural nuances that these vulnerable women are facing. They are probably like to advocate for issues like penalizing catcallers or asking women to come to rallies to lobby the government to solve issues like the pay gap, etc. This then means is that there is going to be active disconnect from these vulnerable women because they can't relate to the issues that the feminist movement is talking about. This then means that to fill that vacuum, they will um, probably refer to like other movements like conservative movement simply because it's more proximate and relatable and convenient for them. So they will buy into narratives like, oh, don't get involved in other people's houses or what's going on in their houses because it simply has nothing to do with you. I want to note that even if these women don't have any sense of self preservation and they believe these Western liberal women, the patriarchal figures are simply going to crack down on them harder and they are going to be in a worse off position, especially impressionable young women, etc. And this is extremely problematic because you're again screwing off the most vulnerable stakeholder by feeding them a delusion. What is the strategic importance of this argument? The main point of a sorority and the feminist movement should be to protect vulnerable women because they are the most at risk at the moment. The moment at which a sorority is unable to protect them, this is when a sorority fails. So op can't win on this whatsoever at all. Second argument then is in terms of accountability. A sorority might stop you from directing criticism towards women whom you perceive as wrong because they have the incentive of protecting themselves from the backlash that they're likely to receive from conservatives for picking and choosing what type of women to support. If the feminist movement tells you, look, don't support women like Erika Kirk or Candace Owens because they propagate harmful rhetoric, this is when you're going to get backlash from those very people saying that the feminist movement picks and chooses what type of women they want to support, and unless your ideology or ideas relate with their ideas, you won't be supported. But also, these women will use it as a defense against the criticism that they're likely to receive from the feminist movement. This then means that they'll be like, look, you're saying support all women, and it's very hypocritical of you. You're not supporting me because I have different views from you. What does this mean? Women who are toxic and deserve to be held accountable will be supported by sororities by force, but also those individuals have no incentive to improve as individuals. Thirdly, you legitimize the actions of these individuals when we protect them within sororities. What does this mean? That the reputation of the sorority will decrease significantly because you're supporting the wrong type of women and you're likely to get internal criticism. But one layer then, even if a sorority doesn't explicitly tell you to not support all women, it can be implied because you don't want to be the reason that a sorority is getting criticism because you didn't support specific women, which means that you'll probably fear the backlash that you're likely to get from your sorority sisters. The reason that you probably fear and stay in this movement for a long time is because it provides you with support and protection, and this is important to you. Third layer, then, really quickly. When you have so many conflicting ideas because you're supporting a wide array of ideas of women, this is when you have a very confused movement. You, as a member, are going to be supporting a ton of ideas. The amount of change that you're going to be able to get is going to be significantly limited because you can't streamline your discourses or resources onto one goal. Three things I want to highlight under this. Collective action is simply going to be a facade on opposition because you don't focus on one collective goal. Different people focus on different things. This means that collective action is not a path of victory on opposition. Even if there is a lot of support, there are going to be prioritization issues. And this is simply an even if layer because like there's going to be conflicts within the movement because everyone feels like their issues should be prioritized because it is something that is proximate to their identity. This then means that there is going to be fragmentation and infighting, and this is exactly what the patriarchy wants us to do because they simply thrive over it. This will end up harming women to a greater extent as they will grow greater resentment towards each other. Thirdly, then, governments will simply not know which narrative to accept because you're being told different things and the government doesn't know which issue to prioritize or give funds to. But also, there is going to be an issue with critical mass. Understand that a government needs a specific amount of people to represent a specific problem for them to give things like legislative change. So, when you have fragmented ideologies, they simply don't know what to do because they have the inherent re-election incentive where they want to get the vote of like the majority. So if the majority isn't proposing a problem, they simply don't have an incentive to care about that problem whatsoever at all. Third argument, then, really quickly, is in terms of how the sorority narrative won't let women undercut other women and why this is important. Especially in the corporate world, it's important that women undercut each other or women undercut people in general because that's how you gain things like power in society, where you have access to things like respect, money, or even status. Men don't have the same rules to play by, which means that they're able to get into the positions that they want so much more faster. We are talking about positions in politics, law, and even in medicine, where these positions are so powerful, where you can have things like legislative change. The moment at which you're telling women you can't undercut people, this is when their success is going to be stunted significantly. Let's discuss the up case now. Two arguments. First argument is in terms of collectivization. The patriarchy is a few things. It's well organized and legitimized because it has existed for so long, which means it knows exactly what to do and when to do it. But secondly, they are wealthy and rich because we are talking about white men who have been running the patriarchy because they have so much power and opportunity that has been given to them historically, which means that they're simply able to fund rallies and debates and things like this to spread their rhetoric. Thirdly, they have great strategy where they use women like Candace Owens to show that a woman thinks that the feminist movement is broken. It's especially harmful when women criticize the feminist movement because it can be weaponized against the movement to delegitimize it. I want to know that the patriarchy encourages things like infighting because it's easier to crack down on women when they are divided. So, this is all the more reason why collectivization is so much more important. Let me prove why. Women have been oppressed for so long, and it's likely that they want the emotional support and the protection that the sorority provides. But also, women haven't had this opportunity historically, but now because the rise is so much more significant, it's likely that they would buy into this. Let me prove why collectivization is likely. Firstly, sororities are going to rise, which means that the women that don't support sororities are going to be in the minority, which means there will be an added level of pressure from your peers, from your sorority, and from your community. But secondly, when you are in a sorority, you learn to be more empathetic because you see the discourse surrounding other women and you understand the struggles that they go through. This then means that you simply have an incentive to care about other women because you recognize that you are in a vulnerable position like you, which means that the change that you are creating within these women is going to be so much more significant because it's an internal type of change where you genuinely care about other women and where you genuinely want to fight for other women. I want to run the argument on like critical mass really quickly. It's about how when collectivization happens, you have simply a more amount of people to help you, and this is good because government will engage in things like legislative change. You're going to work collectively, and this is good because you have a greater quantity. And you, when you have like more manpower, it's harder for the patriarchy to crack down on you. But also, you can get things like legislative change. But also, I want you to know that the quality that you get on arc, even if you can't win on quantity, the quality of change that you get from women is going to be so much more significant on our comparative. Sorority's second layer is sorry, second argument is in terms of what in terms of sororities are what vulnerable women need. First layer, I want to reframe Prop's claim on how there will be a disconnect. Because the women that are going to be leading these movements have a direct incentive to care about these vulnerable women because there's a reason why they're leading the movement. It's because they are passionate about feminism and they understand the struggles that women go through worldwide. Because they could have been a member instead where they focus on their own issues, but they care about women and they want to see some change, and that's why they're leading this movement. You, as a leader, want maximum utility and therefore you would engage in things like collecting donations and aid for women in vulnerable communities, but also pressurizing governments through lobbying and legislature, or pressurizing your own government to pressure other governments like other conservative governments, etc. But also you would create things like discourse where you're talking about issues that women are facing. I quickly want to run a layer on how there will be media coverage. It's in terms of how when you have more amount of people, the media coverage is going to be so much more significant, which means that the issues that vulnerable women are going to be facing are going to be so much more prevalent. Issues of domestic abuse are going to be more prevalent, which means that feminists in the Western liberal world have access to information regarding these women and can help them better. Second layer then is in terms of how sure you can't get through to the ultra conservative women, but you can get through to the moderates in these vulnerable communities, especially young women who want to take a stand against injustice, etc. But also, I want to note that not everyone in a conservative country is conservative, that there are liberal women that are existing in these countries that are going to be leading these movements, and they can easily understand the cultural and like religious nuances of the country, and they are more proximate to these women and they can understand these women so much more, which means that they can simply work with the Western liberal women and get funds, etc., and help out these vulnerable women even more.